Wes Huff just dropped the Islamic dilemma in front of Piers Morgan's massive audience, and it was actually really cool. Okay, they were deep into discussing the evidence for Jesus' resurrection, which is just mind-blowing in itself. They were talking about eyewitness testimony, manuscript reliability, the dating of the Gospels, all the good stuff, when suddenly Piers wanted to pivot. He pivoted pretty hard and challenged Wes on the historical accuracy of the Quran, of all things. And let's just say that Wes did not hold back. Now look, okay, Wes and I have both publicly disagreed on some points, the finer points of theology and history, but we both recognize the undeniable force behind the Islamic dilemma. If you don't yet know what the Islamic dilemma is, stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand the argument very, very clearly, and you're going to know how to actually use it yourself. But pay very close attention to these next few clips, because things are about to get super interesting.
The text of the Quran, like all religious texts, including the Bible, has been misused, misinterpreted, or accurately interpreted, depending on who you talk to. From a historian perspective, how accurate do you think the Quran is, for example?
Well, I think the Quran has a number of problematic historical issues, the chief of which is that Surah 4:157 denies the historical crucifixion of Jesus. And so there's ambiguity as to what's going on in that text when it says that Jesus was neither killed nor was he crucified. And I think that really paints the historical reliability of the Quran into a corner, in that, like I said before, Piers, if there's one thing that even the most skeptical scholars historically will say, if they say we really can know not that much about Jesus of Nazareth, they will admit and say what we can know is that he did die under the reign of Pontius Pilate, the governor of Judea at that time, that he was indeed crucified.
So Wes is about to launch into the Islamic dilemma, but I do want to point out what he's doing here, okay? He's doing something very crucial. Surah 4:157 directly contradicts what virtually every serious historical scholar, Christian or not, acknowledges, that Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. According to the Quran, the Jews boasted about killing Jesus, but the Quran responds very specifically saying, quote, they neither killed nor crucified him. It was only made to appear so. And here's where things get super interesting. Some Islamic scholars have tried to wiggle out of this historical contradiction by suggesting that Surah 4:157 refers only to a specific group of Jews. The claim here is that maybe those particular Jews didn't kill or crucify Jesus, leaving open the possibility that the Romans or some other Jewish group actually did so. But this objection completely ignores what comes immediately after in Surah 4:158, which explicitly says, rather, Allah raised him up to himself. In other words, the Quran is saying that Jesus wasn't merely saved from this particular group of Jews. He wasn't killed or crucified by anyone. Okay, according to the Quran. Allah intervened directly and removed Jesus from earth altogether. Okay, remember, rather, Allah raised him up to himself. That's what it says in verse 148. Classical Islamic commentators like Ibn Kathir make it clear the text means Jesus never faced death or crucifixion at all. The made to appear so wording traditionally has been understood to mean another person was miraculously substituted in his place. But the problem gets way, way worse, because historical sources, including Jewish historian Josephus, Roman historian Tacitus, consistently confirm Jesus was crucified. Okay, even non-Christian, hostile sources agree with the New Testament accounts. So the Quran here doesn't just contradict Christian belief, it contradicts well-established historical facts. And this contradiction sets the stage perfectly for what Wes brings up next in this next clip, the famous Islamic dilemma on the Piers Morgan show. This is really, really good stuff. All right, let's hear Wes explain this argument.
And so I find that the Quran has a number of very problematic historical issues. And then ultimately, as a Christian, the Quran seems to talk about what I believe, talks about the Torah and the gospel multiple times, and seems to fundamentally not understand what the Torah and the gospel are. Particularly, I would highlight verses like chapter 5, verse 46 and 47, which has this chain of custody where it says that Allah sent that God sent following in the footsteps Jesus, the son of Mary, to confirm the Torah, which came before him, and that he gave the gospel, which in the Quran uses the same terminology for the revelation of the Quran, that it has guidance and light, and that the gospel preceded the Torah for instruction in righteousness.
So we're going to pause really quickly and just kind of explain what's going on so far. So notice, Wes is setting up the Islamic dilemma sort of step by step, all right? First, he establishes clearly from the Quran itself that it affirms the authenticity of the Torah and the gospel, calling them, quote, guidance and light. He's specifically referencing Surah 5:46, which explicitly states that Jesus was sent to confirm, not correct or replace the Torah. All right, now let's go back to Wes.
And then verse 47 of chapter 5 of the Quran actually addresses me as a Christian. It says, let the people of the gospel judge by what God has revealed therein, being the gospel. And whoever does not judge by what God has revealed, then it is he who's the defiantly disobedient.
This verse is actually really crucial. Wes emphasizes that Surah 5:47 explicitly commands Christians to judge according to the gospel. The Quran doesn't just affirm the gospel as previously revealed scripture, it literally instructs Christians to actively live and judge by it. So why is this a problem? Wes continues.
And so I find a problem with the Quran in that it confirms the Torah and the gospel, and it tells me as a Christian in chapter 5, verse 46 and 47, to judge by the gospel. However, Piers, when I judge the Quran by the gospel, I find that the Quran does not understand what the gospel is or says. And ultimately, I would say if the Quran is true, and I need to take it seriously to not be one of the defiantly disobedient, as it says, and I judge the gospel, by using the gospel, I judge the Quran. I find that the Quran is hugely problematic historically, but also in that it simply does not understand either what the Torah or the gospel are or what Christians actually believe.
What Wes has done here is brilliant, okay? He laid out a powerful logical trap known as the Islamic dilemma. All right, I've even hosted a discussion or a debate on this topic on my channel between Khalil Andani and Sam Shamoun. You definitely want to go check that out. I've got linked in the description. But let's break this down carefully, step by step, so that you can fully grasp and master this argument for yourself, all right? All right, first, here is the core idea behind the Islamic dilemma. I'm going to spell this out clearly for you guys. All right, premise 1. The Quran explicitly endorses the Torah and the gospel as authentic revelation from Allah. See Surah 5:46-47, also Surah 3:3-4, and Surah 10:94. Premise 2. But the actual Torah and gospel that we historically have today contain doctrines that completely contradict the Quran. Crucially, these doctrines include Jesus' death by crucifixion, which we've already talked about, his resurrection, and his divine identity, core truths of Christianity explicitly denied by the Quran. You combine this together in like a philosophical blender, and it creates a really big problem for Islam. Okay, if the Torah and gospel are trustworthy, as the Quran claims in the verses that we've mentioned, then Islam is false because the Quran directly contradicts those texts. But if the Torah and the gospel have been corrupted or changed, as many Muslims claim today, then the Quran made a serious error by affirming and instructing people to judge by those corrupted texts. This means Islam is also false because the Quran endorses scriptures that supposedly had been tampered with or corrupted. Either horn that you take in this dilemma, Islam runs into a massive problem. It's trapped by its own claims about the Bible. But let me tighten your grip on this argument even further. Okay, when faced with this dilemma, Muslims often argue that when the Quran praises the Torah and the gospel, it's talking about the original versions, not the corrupted versions that we have today. But this escape route doesn't actually work. So first, Quran verses like Surah 6:115 and Surah 18:27 explicitly say that no one can change Allah's words. So if the Torah and the Gospel were Allah's revelations, they couldn't have been universally corrupted. That's actually impossible. Second, Surah 5:47 doesn't just affirm that these texts existed, it commands contemporary Christians at Muhammad's own time to judge by the gospel that they possessed. Why would Allah instruct Christians to obey corrupted texts? It makes no sense. So this dilemma can't just be easily brushed aside like this. It's a logical trap laid out by the Quran itself, okay, intentionally or intentionally. To summarize clearly though, we've got option A on the one hand, we've got a reliable Bible where Islam is false because the Quran contradicts the Bible. But then Option B, where we've got a corrupted Bible, Islam is still false because the Quran wrongly affirms a corrupted Bible. Either choice that you take, either option that you take, Islam impales itself logically. This is why the Islamic dilemma is such an incredibly powerful apologetics tool. It uses Islam's own affirmations against itself, leaving the Muslim with no good way out. You guys need to learn this argument. If you learn to present it clearly, patiently, and confidently, you'll master one of the strongest arguments Christians have for exposing the intellectual inconsistency of Islam. Oh, and remember, Christianity is true.